As you can imagine, this is the most unique video a Doctor Who YouTuber can make, so you may not agree with everything I have to say, however I hope you enjoy regardless. This is also not the first time I've ranked the Doctors, however that video had terrible audio and visual quality and was unscripted and edited, making my pauses continue for an uncomfortable amount of time. I am also not counting non-canon Doctors such as the Peter Cushing Doctor or variations on classic Doctors as their own ranking, nor will I let them contribute to my overall ranking of a Doctor. For example, I will not include the David Bradley version of the first Doctor towards my ranking of the first Doctor. Confused yet? Me too. Number 14. This may seem like a really obvious choice, however when I really think about it, it's almost impossible to place Jodie, as she feels like she's playing a completely different character in almost every single episode she's in. Sometimes she loves conspiracies and sometimes she hates conspiracies, for example. Now I realise that's more to do with Chris Chibnall's writing rather than Jodie herself, but her performances really don't help matters. For the majority of the time, Jodie appears to be on autopilot as she displays few of the Doctor's core traits, but she never exceeds the groundwork a character like the Doctor with such a long-running history provides. She essentially fails to portray any emotion that isn't happiness. Moreover, the way she delivers comedic dialogue makes me wince every time she tells a joke. Whereas an actor like Matt Smith, for example, even if the dialogue wasn't great, somehow got a chuckle out of me. I could go on for hours, but overall this Doctor had few defining character traits, has no comedic timing, and seems to exist only so Chibnall can say, "I made the Doctor a woman, aren't I progressive?" And I just hope that in years to come this interpretation is quietly swept under the rug. Number 13. Now I'll be honest, it hurt to have to put the legendary actor John Hurt Solo down on this list. However, in terms of Doctor Who, we only have one feature-length story with him, during which he feels like a third wheel to Matt and David. And make no mistake, I don't hate this Doctor whatsoever, but that's my problem. I don't really feel anything towards him. We are told during the special that this is the Doctor that broke all the rules and ended the Time War when no one else could. However, that doesn't really come across in the performance or the script, as he seems to be more tired than anything. Which I suppose makes sense, seeing as he's becoming close to the end of his regeneration, but unfortunately we don't get to see what made him this way in Day of the Doctor. And therefore the War Doctor seems a little bit surface level, hollow and generic. And as I said, it's not the fault of John himself, as he feels like he gives a great performance. It's more the circumstances he was in, as the War Doctor was designed to fill a gap between the classic show and the revival, and he serves that purpose well, but does very little beyond that. It breaks my heart to have to put Colin Solo down on this list, as he is one of the few Doctors I've met in real life. But this Doctor is really unlikable for the majority of his televisual appearances, and I know he's received much better treatment in things like Big Finish. However, I haven't really delved deeply into the Sixth Doctor stories, so I can't really give a solid opinion on them. With that said, Colin never gives a bad performance throughout his run, and genuinely seems to enjoy playing the role, even when he knows the scripts are pretty dire. First impressions can make or break your opinion of an incarnation though, and Colin's first story, The Twin Dilemma, he strangles his companion Perry while suffering with post-regeneration trauma, and that leaves a bad taste that tends to sit in my mouth while watching the rest of his run. In addition, the fact we don't get to see a proper send-off for 6 makes me even more annoyed that he wasn't treated the way he should have been. Number 11. I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, as I'm aware that since his departure in 2017, he has gained more and more of a following, but for me the 12th Doctor will always symbolise Miss Potential. As in Series 8, we got a dark interpretation of the Time Lord, after 2 very light versions with 10 and 11, and the fact that British legend Peter Capaldi was playing him, that was just icing on the cake. Unfortunately though, in Series 9 he becomes a hipster granddad with an electric guitar, and sonic sunglasses. Ugh. Not only this, but throughout Series 8 and 9, Clara would frequently take the spotlight away from Capaldi, who in my opinion needed the attention a lot more than she did. I will say he did improve in Series 10 with the death of Clara and the introduction of Bill, as he seems to be playing a blend of Series 8 and 9 personas. However, it still doesn't quite live up to the original idea presented in his first series. But as I said, he, like Colin, never phoned in a performance, and I miss him now more than I ever thought I would. Number 10. William Hartnell will always deserve the utmost respect for being the first actor to bring the Doctor to life. However, throughout his run and onwards, the character underwent many changes. For example, in An Earthly Child, he comes across as very abrasive and nasty. And even worse is when the Tardis travels back to the Stone Age, and the Doctor attempts to knock out a caveman with a rock. Thankfully, Verity and Bill agreed that the Doctor was too nasty, and he continued to mellow throughout his run. But some of those early episodes are a little rough around the edges. Not only that, but in a few of his later episodes, particularly in The Celestial Toymaker, the Doctor is missing from the episode due to his declining health, which can be a little distracting. Regardless, though, you could tell that this role meant everything to him, and that he really comes across in the performance. Moreover, due to the way the show was filmed in the 60s, it wasn't possible to have multiple takes of any given scene, and therefore the actors had to rehearse their lines much like the theatre. Meaning that mistakes were pretty common, particularly from Hartnell, who had to say a lot of difficult technobabble, so some of his mistakes when speaking are a lot more forgivable given the circumstances. The first Doctor will always be iconic, and if you're a Doctor Who fan, you owe it to yourself to revisit his era. And no, I'm not talking about the Twice Upon a Time interpretation, as the character in that episode is not the first Doctor, but rather a thinly veiled caricature that's only there purely to push the BBC's agenda. Number 9. Jon Pertwee's era signified a complete shift for the show, as prior to his era the show had been known more for its outlandish scenarios rather than a recurring cast of characters and locations. And some people prefer the Earthbound stories of this era, however I do tend to enjoy the more absurd stories of the 60s. In addition, you're probably aware that the show took a lot of inspiration from Bond at this time. And this is true for the lead as well, as the third Doctor dealt with his foes in a much more hands-on manner than his predecessors, using a martial art known as Venusian Aikido, which, while being pretty badass, feels a little too physical for a character known for his intelligence. Not only that, but this Doctor thoroughly enjoys driving about in bizarre vehicles such as Bessie and the Whomobile, which, fun fact, Jon actually paid for because he wanted it in the show so badly. I know that my opinion on the third Doctor is pretty subjective, but I personally prefer a more methodical Doctor that doesn't really use gadgets to get the job done. With that said though, Jon never gives a dull performance, clearly enjoyed playing the role, and his era will always be remembered for introducing iconic elements like the Master. But he's just not my favourite interpretation of the character, and there's not much else I can say about it. Number 8. My opinion on Peter Davison's Doctor has changed somewhat throughout the years, as I used to see him as rather vanilla and generic, when compared to some of the more eccentric counterparts. However, whilst delving into the classic library, I realised that his Doctor is a lot more emotionally developed than I realised, as he is shown to be confident and arrogant while showing humanity, more so than the majority of his other incarnations. In a way, he almost feels like Hartnell's Doctor in a younger man's body, as he shares very similar traits with the first Doctor, which is evident during the 5 Doctors, which may be down to the fact that Davison was most familiar with the first Doctor. Number 7. The next choice is definitely going to put a target on my back, as I know for many people David Tennant is the best Doctor, and I must say I used to be one of those people. However, when I go back and revisit him, I just don't feel as if he stands out when compared to the others. I mean, he's got the occasional comedic moment and the occasional dark moment, but to me there's nothing that really that memorable there. Although he is definitely his best when paired up with Donna Noble and Bernard Cribbins as Wilfrid Mott, Donna's grandfather. He's definitely more enjoyable without the continuous romantic subplots he had with Rose and Martha. Number 6. Sylvester's Doctor is a tale of two halves for me. As in series 24, he's playing a rather generic comedic Doctor. However, in series 25 and 26, he really starts to come into his own with the introduction of Ace and a chess master angle, which made him feel like he was always in control of any given situation. And when he goes dark, he really sells it. But as I said, his first series is a bit of a stinger, and as I said, when talking about Colin, first impressions can really shape my opinion of a Doctor. Whew, okay, we're at the halfway point, and if you're bashing at your keyboards in rage because your favourite Doctor is near the bottom, then don't worry, because I love all the Doctors. Aside from one. Number 5. There are 2 key issues I have with Eccleston's Doctor, which prevent him from being any higher up on the list than he is. Number 1. We only get 1 series with him. Now I know that Chris's exit is muddled with rumours and speculation, however from a fan's perspective it's a real shame that Chris left when he did, as I believe his incarnation had a lot more room for growth beyond Series 1. In addition, it feels like we only saw the end of this Doctor's life, as the pictures Clive shows Rose imply that he'd been around for a lot longer. It would have been interesting to explore more of what he did during that time, but that will never happen due to Eccleston refusing to come back, including the 50th anniversary. Which I find to be a real shame, seeing as we never got to see the War Doctor's complete regeneration, but that's besides the point. Number 2, he's not as enjoyable to rewatch. Say what you like about David, at least when you watch his Doctor, you know you're in for a good time, but watching the 9th Doctor feels depressing sometimes. And before you say anything, I know the idea was for him to be recovering from the Time War, and that works really well, but it's not as fun to watch him on screen knowing what he suffered and how much of a huge loss it is. And the jokes that he makes are genuinely funny, but I just don't feel as entertained when watching him as I do with Smith or Tom Baker. Number 4. I really do enjoy Matt Smith. It's obvious that Moffat had a clear vision for what he wanted this Doctor to be, as he feels like an old man trapped inside a young man's body, and is still trying to act cool for the kids, and that works for a character like the Doctor who's been around for so long. But if you peel it back just a bit further, you get a sense of how broken he is, as he uses his comedy to cope with the tragedy of his life. And I think that's a really interesting direction to take the character, even if it doesn't always work and some of the lines come across as a bit cringy and dated. Number 3. Patrick Troughton is a Doctor that rises up in my rankings every year. His dynamic with Jamie McCrimmon is fantastic. He was the first Doctor to run away from dangerous threats as a first response, something that would become a staple later on. He was the first to say,
"You've had this place redecorated, haven't you? Don't like it.
Come along, Doctor."
And he was basically an inspiration for Sylvester and Matt, turning from comedic to serious at a turn of a dime, whilst being kind and understanding of his companions. This Doctor is one of the best, which is why it's so sad that so many of his stories have been lost to time. Number 2. What can I say about this Doctor that hasn't already been said? This Doctor will always be iconic and timeless in a way that few other Doctors can be. With Jelly Babies and the Scarf being almost as iconic as the Tardis and Sonic, this Doctor introduces a wild-eyed craziness that was quite refreshing for the classic series, as most of the Doctors prior to this were quite reserved and kind. This Doctor is the complete opposite of that though, as you never quite know what he's thinking or what he's going to do, making him thrilling to watch. The one complaint I do have is that towards the end of his run, particularly in Series 18, he seems to be phoning in his performances a little bit. Being the longest serving Doctor, he was bound to have some fatigue at some point. But it's undeniable that this Doctor had a huge impact on the rest of the franchise going forward, and for that I am very grateful. Number 1. This will be a little anticlimactic if any of you have seen my defending the 8th Doctor video, but for those of you who haven't, I'll sum up my thoughts on the 8th Doctor here. I believe the 8th Doctor to be a perfect blend between the classic and modern Doctors. He is charismatic but also intelligent, kind but also alien. He is timeless but also feels like he would fit right in the Victorian or Edwardian periods. He also feels the most like a Time Lord to me, with a voice that feels grand yet human, and an authority that feels otherworldly. Overall, this Doctor is just the perfect Doctor to me, and is the first man I think of when I think of the Doctor. But at the end of the day, that's just my opinion, and if you feel differently, feel free to leave your comments in the comments below. You can tell I'm bad at this whole marketing thing. Don't forget to join the Tardis Discord for more discussion, and follow me on Twitter to hear me whine some more. And if you're feeling really generous, go support me on Patreon to fund my addiction to criticizing things, and I guess that's it. Jodie sucks. Bye.